The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I remember the exact time because I had just finished the last slide of a presentation I'd been building for 3 days straight. I was in Denver, a software conference, the kind where you shake hands with people whose names you've read in industry newsletters and try to sound like you belong in the same room. My company had sent me specifically because I was the one who built the platform we were pitching. 32 years old, lead developer, and for the first time in my career, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something real. Then my phone lit up. My brother's name on the screen. My brother, older than me by 6 years, the one my parents always introduced first at family gatherings, the one who never quite figured out what to do with his life but always had an opinion about mine. We weren't close. Hadn't been for years. So when I saw his name at midnight, I felt the first twist of something wrong before I even answered. "It's Dad," he said. "No hello. He collapsed at dinner. They're taking him to St. Luke's right now." I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. "What do you mean collapsed?" "His heart, they think. Mom is hysterical. The doctors are saying they need to run emergency diagnostics tonight, and if anything shows up, they're going straight to surgery. Ryan, they need the deposit before they'll move forward." "What deposit? That's not how hospitals work. It's a private cardiac specialist, the one Dad has been seeing. You know how he is. He doesn't trust the regular ER guys. Mom already called Dr. Harmon's office, and they said for an after-hours emergency procedure, they need a financial hold up front. $250,000. It covers everything." I pressed my hand flat against my knee to keep it from bouncing. $250,000. My father had been having some heart irregularities over the past year, minor things. His cardiologist had said, manageable with medication. But the word surgery made the floor feel unsteady under me. "Why are you calling me? You're there. You can handle it." A pause. Then, and I will never forget this, his voice shifted into something softer, something carefully constructed to sound helpless. "I don't have that kind of liquidity right now, Ryan. You know that, but you do. The renovation business account, you got the operating reserve in there. Dad set that up for you, remember? He always said you were the responsible one. He said it like a compliment. I heard it like a key turning in a lock. My father had helped me start my freelance development business 4 years ago. He put in the first $50,000 as a loan, which I had already paid back with interest, and he'd co-signed on my business account when I needed a higher transaction limit. He wasn't on the account. He had no access to it. But he knew it existed, and apparently he'd told my brother. "Send me the hospital information," I said. "The doctor's name, the facility, everything. I'll call and verify." Another pause. Longer this time. "Ryan, Dad is on a gurney right now. There isn't time to." "Then they'll wait 5 minutes while I make a phone call." I kept my voice flat. "Send me the information." What he sent me was a name and a phone number. No address, no hospital letterhead, no patient intake reference number. Just a name, Dr. Harmon, and a number I didn't recognize. I called it. It rang 4 times and went to a generic voicemail. No doctor's name, no office name, just a beep. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Then I called my mother directly. She picked up on the second ring and she was not hysterical. She was watching television. She told me my father had gone to bed an hour ago with a mild headache and was sleeping fine. She had no idea what I was talking about. I asked her to go check on him. 30 seconds later, she came back on the line and said he was snoring. I thanked her, told her everything was fine, and told her to go back to her show. Then I sat in that Denver hotel room at midnight and I understood something completely. My brother had tried to steal money from me using our father's heart as the crowbar. I didn't call him back that night. I didn't say anything. I sat with it the way you sit with a diagnosis, the kind where you need a few hours before you can decide what to do next. Here's what you need to know about my brother. His name is Derek, and for most of our lives he operated at the edge of other people's patience. Not malicious, exactly, or at least that's what I used to tell myself, just perpetually in motion toward the easiest available option. He borrowed money from our parents in his 20s and called it an investment. He borrowed money from a friend for a food truck that never materialized and called it a setback. He married a woman named Cynthia who was, in my private opinion, the first person who had ever truly matched his energy, which was not a compliment to either of them. They lived 40 minutes from my parents. I lived 2 hours away, which meant I was close enough to be present for holidays and emergencies, but far enough that I wasn't in the daily current of their lives. That distance had felt like protection. That night in Denver, I realized that it also felt like an opportunity to someone. I didn't sleep much. I spent most of the night thinking through the geometry of what had happened. He needed money. He knew about my business account. He invented a crisis calibrated specifically to make rational thinking feel like cruelty. Because what kind of person stops to verify information when their father might be dying? The kind of person who had watched Derek operate for 32 years, it turned out. By morning, I had a plan, not a revenge plan. I want to be clear about that. A documentation plan. Because the thing about people like Derek is they don't stop at one attempt. If this one failed quietly, he would regroup and try a different angle. The only way to actually end it was to let him go further. When I landed back home 2 days later, I called him. "Hey," I said, "I'm sorry about the other night. I panicked. I should have just trusted you." He recovered quickly. I'll give him that. It's fine. Turned out to be a false alarm anyway. Dad is good. I feel terrible, I said. Can we meet for lunch this week? I want to make things right. We met at a diner halfway between our houses. He brought Cynthia, which I hadn't expected, but which told me something useful. This was not a solo operation. Over sandwiches, I told him I'd been thinking about doing some estate planning, getting my affairs in order. I'd spoken to a financial advisor, I said, and I was consolidating some accounts, moving my operating reserve into a more accessible structure. I mentioned a number 400,000 and I watched Cynthia's hand stop moving over her coffee cup for just a fraction of a second. That's smart, Derek said. Good to have things liquid. Yeah, I said. I'm actually setting up a new transfer authorization this week, getting some of the paperwork sorted. I did not set up any new transfer authorization. What I did set up was a conversation with my bank's fraud department, which I had already initiated the morning after Denver, and a meeting with an attorney friend of mine named Paul, who specialized in civil litigation and had once described financial fraud between family members as the most emotionally complicated and legally straightforward cases I handle. Paul advised me to be patient. If he tries again, he said, and it sounds like he will, you want it documented. You want a paper trail that shows a pattern, not just an incident. So I waited. It took 11 days. The second call came on a Saturday morning. This time it was Cynthia, not Derek, and the story had been upgraded. My father had apparently signed documents. She was very vague about what kind, related to a property investment Derek had been working on, and there was a filing deadline on Monday that required a processing fee, $80,000. If it wasn't paid by end of business Monday, my father would be personally liable for a penalty that could affect his retirement accounts. I need you to send it directly to the escrow account, Cynthia said. I can text you the routing number. Of course, I said. Can you give me until tomorrow morning? I have a few things to move around. First thing tomorrow, she said. Please, Ryan, your dad is really stressed about this. I told her I understood. I told her I'd take care of it. Then I called her I'd take care of it. Then I called my father. He knew nothing about any property investment. He had not signed any documents. He was, in fact, mildly irritated to be receiving a phone call on a Saturday morning about things he did not understand. I asked him to do one thing. I asked him to call Derek that afternoon. Just a normal call, nothing specific, and mention casually that he and I had spoken. That was all. Then I sent Paul the recording of Cynthia's call. I had told her at the start of the call that I might be recording for my own records, a detail I mentioned in a tone that implied it was routine, bureaucratic, the kind of thing you say and no one registers. She had said, sure, fine, and kept going. Paul called me back within an hour. This is wire fraud, he said. Attempted at minimum. With the first incident documented and this one recorded, you're the foundation of a real case. I told him I wasn't sure I wanted to go that far. Derek was still my brother. My parents were still alive. Thanksgiving still existed. Paul said, then at least let me send a letter. The letter went out on a Monday. It was addressed to both Derek and Cynthia from Paul's firm, and it outlined, in language that was precise and absolutely without warmth, the two documented incidents, the legal definitions that applied to what had occurred, and the consequences that would follow if any further contact regarding financial transactions took place. I did not warn Derek it was coming. He called me 4 hours after it arrived. I had never heard my brother sound like that before. The easiness was completely gone. That loose, practiced calm he'd worn his whole life like a comfortable jacket. What was underneath it was smaller and louder and genuinely frightened. What is this? He said. What did you do? I documented what happened, I said. both times. You're going to destroy this family over you trying to steal from me twice, I said. Using Dad's health the first time. Using his name the second time. Silence. I'm not filing anything, I said. Right now. That letter is a boundary. If the boundary holds, nothing happens. If it doesn't hold, Paul files and it goes wherever it goes. More silence. Then, does Mom know? Not yet. I heard him breathe. That's your decision to make, I said, not mine. I don't know what he told her. I wasn't there for that conversation, and I haven't asked. What I know is that 3 weeks later, my mother called me on a Sunday afternoon and said Derek had told her there had been some kind of misunderstanding, and that she hoped we could all move past it. She said it the way she said most difficult things, quickly, in a tone that asked me not to make her go further into it. I told her I loved her. I told her Dad should probably be the only one listed on any documents or accounts going forward, and that if anyone ever called her about money on his behalf, she should call me directly before doing anything. She said she would. She sounded tired. My father called me separately a few days later. He asked me straight out what had happened. I told him, not everything, but enough. The phone call from Denver, the fake emergency, the escrow number. He was quiet for a long time. He asked me once, my father finally said, when you started doing well, whether I thought you'd help the family out if things got hard. I told him that wasn't really how it worked, that you'd worked for what you had, and it wasn't sitting there for other people to access. He found a way around that framing, I said. I see that. Another pause. I'm sorry, Ryan. You didn't do anything. I know, but I'm sorry anyway. I thought about that for a while after we hung up. My father apologizing for something he didn't do, because he understood that the thing that had been leveraged against me was his name, his health, his reputation as the kind of man whose emergency would make his son stop thinking and start transferring. Derek had counted on love being faster than logic. He wasn't entirely wrong. For about 30 seconds in a Denver hotel room, heart going, presentation half finished on my laptop, I had almost sent the money. I had almost moved before thinking. The thing that stopped me wasn't cynicism about my brother. It was a specific habit I had built over years of working in systems, the habit of verifying before executing. You don't push code to production without testing it. You don't authorize a transaction without confirming the endpoint. I had applied that habit to a midnight phone call about my father's heart, and it had saved me $250,000 and whatever came after. I don't tell this story to make Derek look like a monster. He isn't one. He's a person who wanted money, made a calculation about the fastest route to it, and was wrong about how well he knew me. Those are ordinary human failures, scaled up into something that required a lawyer and a fraud report, and a Sunday phone call where my mother asked me to please let it go. I also don't tell this story to make myself sound smart. I got lucky in a specific way. I happened to be in the right headspace, the right distance from panic, the right amount of tired to be methodical instead of reactive. A different night, a different mood, and the story ends in Denver. What I will say is this. If you have something worth protecting, a business account, a savings fund, anything that someone close to you knows exists, the people most likely to come for it are not strangers. They're the ones who know your access codes because you mentioned them once at dinner, the ones who know your father's cardiologist's name, the ones who know that if they use the right words at the right hour, you will stop thinking and start feeling. The wire never went through. The escrow number was a personal account registered to a name I didn't recognize. Paul found that out later, part of his documentation. The whole architecture had been built quickly and not well, because Derek had assumed he wouldn't need it to hold up to much scrutiny. He was right that I loved my father enough to act without thinking. He was wrong that loving someone means you stop paying attention. My dad is fine, by the way. His heart has been stable for 2 years. He turned 68 last spring and we took him to a steakhouse, and he complained that the portions were too large and ate every bit of his. My brother was not there. We haven't spoken since the letter. That's a loss I sit with sometimes. Not with anger, exactly, but with the particular weight of something that can't quite be undone. The presentation in Denver, the one I'd been building for 3 days when the call came in, we landed the client. It was the biggest contract my company had signed to date. I finished the last slide at 11:43 that night. The call came at 11:47, 4 minutes. That's the margin between the version of that night where I kept my head and the version where I didn't. 4 minutes, and a habit I'd built without knowing I'd ever need it for anything other than software. I think about that sometimes. How close the edges are. How much depends on what you've already decided before the phone ever rings.